Let's head to Washington now. And a major headline, of course, over the weekend was the stunning death of South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham. He served on powerful committees, including the Judiciary and the Budget Committee. He was well established in foreign policy, known as a hawk. He had just returned from a trip to Ukraine. Joining us now is our Washington correspondent, Stephen Goin, to talk about all of this. Stephen, good morning. We know that President Trump had spoken to Senator Graham just hours before his death, and tributes are pouring in from across the world. How is Washington responding?
So we have seen a lot of reaction to Senator Graham's surprising death from over the weekend. Like you mentioned, President Trump, he did say he talked to Senator Graham just hours before his death. Other senators have said the same thing, so this really was unexpected. President Trump was one of the first to really talk about this on social media. He called Graham a dear friend and a great politician, and he ordered flags across the country to be flown at half-staff in his honor. On Capitol Hill, we saw condolences from both sides. Just some examples here. Graham's fellow South Carolina Senator Tim Scott, he had some emotional words about the loss of a friend. Senate Majority Leader, Republican John Thune, he said Graham was a strong advocate for the U.S. and a strong ally to other countries. Meanwhile, Democrat Elizabeth Warren said, quote, "Even though we disagreed on much, he was always willing to negotiate." So some bipartisanship there as lawmakers are remembering one of their own.
And this is certainly going to have a ripple effect on Capitol Hill. How is that going to impact the operation of the Senate?
Absolutely. This will have an impact, at least in the short term. Just realistically, Republicans are losing one reliable vote. So now the total will be 51 Republicans, 45 Democrats, and 2 independents who usually caucus with the Democrats, so 51 versus 47. But with Senator Mitch McConnell still in the hospital after his fall last month, it's really more like 50 to 47 who will currently be voting on things. This will make it much more difficult for Republicans to move forward with any legislation, especially if there are defections in their party. And we've been seeing that lately, especially from some moderate Republicans and also from those who are not running for re-election. South Carolina's governor, though, will be appointing someone to fill this seat. We should see that shortly, but they'll only be in office for a few months because there is an election that was already on the books in South Carolina for Lindsey Graham's seat. So we will see someone win that election in November, and they will fill the seat for the next 6 years.
Yeah, so much going on Capitol Hill and around the world. Stephen, thank you so much for your insight, and we'll talk with you again tomorrow.